The man you're looking at is actually a real person. This isn't AI, this is an official Santa Ana PD booking photo from 2012. However, once you hear about this man's horrible actions, you'll probably wish that he was fake, because he's the definition of evil. In this video, I'm going to be discussing a series of disturbing things that have happened around the world, with a focus on cases that you most likely have never heard of, because that's what I do. So, I'll tell you everything, but as usual, let's get into the backstories first. On the Sunday evening of November 23, 1980, many families across a remote part of southern Italy were sitting down eating dinner. It was just after 7:30 p.m., and in the small mountain villages that covered this region, everything felt exactly the way it usually did. In one town, a group of young people had gathered at their local church to hear a visiting priest speak, and for the people here, this was just another quiet night at the end of the week, or beginning, depending on how you look at it. The geographical region we're talking about, Irpinia, sits in the mountains about an hour east of Naples. In 1980, it was pretty underdeveloped. Some have even said that it was one of the poorest regions at the time. The villages here were pretty small, anywhere from a couple thousand to maybe 6,000 people, and they'd been around for centuries. Families lived in old stone houses that their great-grandparents had built using stones from the area that were held together with cheap mortar or sometimes even just dried mud. People made their living from farming, growing grapes for wine, and raising sheep. Just try to imagine it as somewhere where life was very slow and everyone knew everyone. The thing is with this location is that when the sun went down, the villages were basically cut off from the outside world. The roads that went through these mountains were narrow and very difficult. Phone service barely existed, and if something went wrong, you're pretty much just on your own until the sun came back up. One of the worst things that could have gone wrong is something that had struck in the area before, an earthquake. The thing is, it had been so many years since the people here were affected by one, and so many of them went through their lives not expecting one to ever hit again. And it makes sense, I mean, these are natural disasters that happen at random, but they were more common than a lot of people knew. Major earthquakes hit there many times in the centuries leading up to this, and the old buildings had been damaged, but each time they were never properly fixed. One problem involves the government. There's going to be a lot of this, but they hadn't even classified most of this region as earthquake-prone. So there were no special safety requirements for construction. The houses that people trusted to keep them safe, the churches they gathered in every Sunday, many of these buildings had serious structural problems that nobody was paying attention to. And this is because for many people living there were bigger things to pay attention to, like putting food on the table. Very horribly though, this area was about to experience a devastating earthquake, and no one there had any idea it was coming. At 7:34 p.m. on Sunday, November 23, 1980, while families were still at their dinner tables and those young people were still sitting in the church pews, the ground beneath them started to shake. This was not a quick jolt, it was a deep rolling motion that went on and on, caused by 3 separate ruptures underground happening one after another. In total, it lasted about 90 seconds, and it seriously must have felt like it was never going to end. Here's another recording of the earthquake that was caught on a nearby radio station. This one is very eerie. Now, I didn't show you the entire thing, but again, it lasted around 90 seconds. And for these old stone villages, this was more than enough time for absolute disaster. Buildings that had stood for generations came apart, walls collapsed into the streets, roofs caved in, and in the town where the young people had gathered for that visiting priest, the ceiling of the medieval church fell on everyone inside. Inside there alone, 100 people lost their lives. In another village of about 1,500 people, entire blocks were flattened so fast that families never even got the chance to make it out of their homes. One mayor passed away while trying to dig his neighbors out of the rubble after a wall gave way directly on top of him. And there are so many stories here, but another horrible one I read was that an orphanage came down on the children sleeping inside. The already poor communication system went down completely when the power went out across the entire region. This left thousands of people standing there or buried in the dark with no way to tell anyone outside of the villages what had just happened. Now, things just got worse from here. Because all communication was down and the mountain roads were blocked by landslides and debris, the government over in Rome had no idea just how bad this was. The early reports just said that there had been an earthquake in a village in the south. Officials completely missed how widespread the damage actually was. Soldiers did arrive the following day, tens of thousands of them, but they went to the larger towns that were easier to reach first. Smaller villages deeper in the mountains just waited and waited. Some didn't see any outside help for 3 days and others waited up to 5 days. During all of this time, survivors were searching through collapsed buildings with their bare hands, listening to voices that got weaker as the hours passed. It wasn't until 2 days after the earthquake that Italy's president, against the wishes of his very own government, flew out to the disaster zone himself, and what he found there made him more upset than the Italian public had ever seen him. The very next day, he went on national television and said something that shocked the entire country. You could still hear cries coming from under the rubble. People who might have been saved were passing away because nobody had reached them in time, and he even spoke about how a little girl approached him in desperation, threw herself around his neck, and told him while crying that she had lost her mother, her father, and her brothers. For a sitting president to publicly criticize his own government's response like this was pretty unexpected. It forced Italy to properly confront this. And this was shown on all channels, so it actually mobilized a lot of volunteers too. After the rescuers finally visited every village and the recovery efforts came to an end, the actual scope of what had happened became clear. Nearly 3,000 people had lost their lives, more than 8,000 had been seriously injured, and something like 250,000 people were now homeless. 250,000 people with nowhere to go as winter set in. 75,000 houses had been completely destroyed, and in one small village alone, more than 300 people had passed away, roughly 1 out of every 5 residents. And remember, surrounding areas were deeply affected by this too. This was the epicenter. This was a magnitude 6.9 earthquake, and over 26,000 square kilometers were affected, including Naples. Entire families had been wiped out, and it's one thing to hear these stories in hindsight, but I highly encourage you to look into the actual journalism that was being done at the time because there's some dark stuff. Here's an example.
You, the warmly dressed visitor from America who last night slept in a comfortable hotel room, what can you say to comfort and reassure these people?
Your wife, where's your wife?
No, my wife is dead.
Oh, you lost a wife and 3 sons.
3 sons, yes.
I'm very sorry.
And brothers too.
And you lost a brother here.
No, brother, my brother.
Your brother?
Yeah.
Oh,
Fradele, not a good name.
Fradele.
Some communities had so many people pass away that survivors could not keep up with the burials, and what made all of it even harder to bear was the knowledge that some of these people did not have to pass away. Research on earthquake survival shows that most people rescued alive are pulled out within the first 48 hours. Some of these villages took 5 days to get to, and after this 48-hour window, the odds drop really fast. There were many people who survived the initial collapse who were trapped alive, but who waited in the dark for rescuers who never came. But again, locals did do their best with what they had before they did arrive. And the aftermath of this disaster stretched on for decades and decades and revealed problems that went far beyond just a slow rescue operation. When the government started sending money to rebuild the region, which amounted to tens of billions of dollars over the years, organized crime moved in almost immediately. Within 2 weeks of the earthquake, a mayor who had tried to stop criminal groups from winning reconstruction contracts was murdered. And this eventually became one of the biggest corruption scandals in Italian history. Politicians accepted bribes, and by some estimates, less than a quarter of all that money, tens of billions, actually made it to the people who needed help. Some towns were so thoroughly destroyed that residents just gave up on them entirely, eventually relocating to build new villages somewhere else, and by 10 years after the earthquake, thousands of people still lived in temporary shelters, and the region has simply never recovered its population. People just kept leaving. But again, the disaster did force Italy to finally build a real emergency response system, and the building codes got rewritten so that every part of the country is now classified by earthquake risk. The president's words from that broadcast have become the main lesson people remember. It's not the earth that kills, he said. It's bad buildings, slow responses, and a tolerance for things not working the way they should. For the families who lost everything that Sunday evening, these lessons came far too late to matter. Rest in peace to every single person who lost their life in this tragedy, and I hope the hundreds of thousands of people who were affected by this and are still around, as well as their families, have only been getting better. The 2-year-old girl at the center of this story is named Vienna Rose Irwin, and in May of 2023, she was living with her parents, Claire and Clayton Irwin, in the Cobourg area of Ontario. She was a very lively and bubbly young girl. People who knew her described her as always smiling, and for that reason, her family gave her the nickname Sunshine. Like a lot of working parents, Claire and Clayton sent their daughter to daycare while they were at work. In this case, it was a place called Watch Me Grow Daycare on Baltimore Road in Hamilton Township. It was operated by a woman named Diane Dennis out of a converted house, and it had been running since 2011 with a full provincial license. According to the Ontario Ministry of Education, the facility had no history of serious incidents, but an inspection 3 months earlier had flagged 8 requirements that weren't being met. Records say these were resolved, but nobody has ever disclosed what those 8 things actually were. The property also included a fenced-in outdoor playground area where the toddlers could spend time during warmer weather. But it was inside this very area where something unbelievable happened, and if you're not familiar with this case, like I wasn't, get ready because it's pretty bad. So the morning of Thursday, May 25th, 2023 went just as it usually did. Claire would put little Vienna into the car and buckle her in. They'd head out, and then she did what she did plenty of times before. She dropped Vienna off at Watch Me Grow Daycare. From here, Claire would go about her normal daily routine, and then later in the afternoon, when she was done, she drove back to the daycare to pick up her daughter. On this Thursday, she arrived just after 5 p.m., and when she got there, the staff told her that Vienna was missing. And even worse, despite knowing that Vienna was nowhere to be found, nobody was looking anywhere for her. Police had not been notified, and Claire hadn't even been notified until she arrived. This sent Claire into a massive panic. She looked around quickly and then took the lead and called 911 at around 5:17 p.m. And very quickly, the area flooded with emergency responders. Neighbors came out to help, fire trucks arrived, people searched the woods, the ditches along the county road, anywhere a toddler might have wandered. But remember, Vienna was in that fenced-in area. It was not possible for her to leave, so where could she have gone? One neighbor later said that watching the mother during those moments was something she'd never forget, and for about 45 minutes, nobody knew where she was. But they would eventually find little Vienna at around 6 o'clock. Vienna wasn't in the woods or wandering down some ditch along the road. She was inside a septic tank on the daycare property within the fenced-in playground area where the children played every single day. And according to multiple people who were close to the family, she was found with the tank sealed. It wasn't open, it was sealed. The lid was on. A septic tank access was just in there where kids played. When Vienna was pulled out, she was unresponsive. Paramedics did CPR and rushed her to a hospital with a police escort, but it was too late. Vienna Rose Irwin was pronounced deceased. Early news reports described it as an open well and said she had wandered off the property, but the family and people who knew them have consistently said that this is very wrong. So the question is, how on earth did a 2-year-old end up inside a sealed septic tank? Well, over 2.5 years on, we do not have an answer to that question. The Ontario Provincial Police opened a major investigation involving their crime unit, forensic services, and the criminal investigation branch. Watch Me Grow Daycare was shut down the next day and has never reopened, though I have seen community members claiming that Diane Dennis still watches children out of her home. For 19 months, Claire and Clayton waited for answers while investigators worked the case. And according to multiple sources, the staff members who were working that day have not cooperated with police or provided statements. And then on December 13th, 2024, the OPP announced that the investigation was over. No charges would be filed, and their statement said there was no reasonable prospect of conviction. Of course, for Claire and Clayton, this was not justice. They buried their daughter without ever learning what actually happened to her or how she ended up in there. The autopsy results were never released, and nobody explained how Vienna got into that tank or who closed the lid, so the families started fighting. They launched what has since become a massive campaign, the Justice for Vienna campaign, which has gathered over 16,000 petition signatures and raised more than $140,000. In May of 2025, they filed a civil lawsuit against Diane Dennis, her husband Edward Dennis, the staff members, and various contractors and oversight authorities. At a rally on the one-year anniversary of Vienna's death, about 100 people showed up in Coburg holding signs covered in butterflies, her favorite thing. Justice for Vienna signs are absolutely everywhere in this area, and some people have said that the signs keep getting removed from properties in Baltimore and Coburg, which isn't suspicious at all. Vienna Rose Irwin would have turned 4 in March of 2025. Her family is still calling her Sunshine, and they're still waiting for someone to explain how their daughter ended up in a sealed septic tank while the people being paid to watch her did nothing, called no one, and seemingly won't say a word. I really hope for their sake that we get more answers soon. So this case is pretty close to me, not that close, but kind of close to me, and when someone I know told me about it, I just was so surprised that I hadn't heard of it. Going through community groups and hearing what locals say will blow your mind even more. I didn't want to report all of that just because Facebook comments don't exactly look like proof, so I'm not going to do that, but I will encourage you to go look into it. Remember, these are locals. I mean, even if she did somehow fall in there and pull the lid shut herself, why was nobody charged for having an accessible septic tank inside an area in a daycare where young children play? Something is going on here. I don't really know what else to say. I just really hope that this family gets the answers that they so desperately deserve. And given how many people watch these, it's the least I could do. Claire has public social media and she's still absolutely going after it. She's not giving up, which I really admire. So to that I say keep fighting, keep going after it, and I'm sure one of these days it will pay off. Rest in peace to this poor little girl, and my heart absolutely shatters for her and her family. On the evening of October 4th, 2012, a 10-year-old boy was doing what thousands of kids across America do every week. He was heading to soccer practice. He was walking along a bike trail in Santa Ana, California, accompanied by his 19-year-old cousin. There was no reason to think that this Thursday evening would be different from any other. But somewhere along this trail there was a stranger waiting, and this 10-year-old was about to meet him. This man was Victor Joseph Espinoza, a 55-year-old, 425-pound man. But his size wasn't what made him dangerous, it was his history. Santa Ana police had been dealing with this man for 3 decades up to this point, and one officer would later describe him to reporters as an old-school, old-time gangster. Over the course of his adult life, he had racked up more than 60 arrests, touching on nearly every category of violent crime. Court records show convictions for assault, felony criminal threats, felony vandalism, public intoxication, and the list just goes on. Those were just his convictions, but he'd also been arrested for assault with a deadly weapon and attempted murder. But these particular charges didn't result in convictions. He was a documented gang member with ties to Mexican street gangs, and despite this extensive record, on this Thursday evening, he was a free man. At around 7:20 p.m. on this Thursday night, as the boy and his cousin made their way towards the soccer field, Espinoza approached them, and according to police accounts and witness statements, this man didn't waste any time. He immediately tried to get the kid's interest by asking if the boy wanted to see his gang tattoo, and then, without warning, he grabbed him and pulled him towards his body before, quote, sniffing his arm. The boy was now trying to get away, and the 19-year-old cousin shouted at this massive stranger to release him. The boy eventually managed to break free from Espinoza's grip, and the boy and his cousin immediately fled towards the soccer field where practice was underway. They ran straight to the boy's coach and immediately told him what happened. And this coach is just awesome. He later chose to remain anonymous in media interviews, but this guy did not hesitate. He went directly to the bike trail and confronted Espinoza. And despite the enormous size difference, the coach charged at him and ended up bringing him to the ground. For a moment, it did look like the situation was now completely under control, but obviously physically restraining a dude that much bigger than you was another matter entirely. Victor managed to get back up and fled on foot. And this all happened real fast. Santa Ana police arrived around 7:30, which was 10 minutes after this all happened, and by this point the suspect had completely vanished into the neighborhood. But the coach's physical description gave officers exactly what they needed. A police helicopter went up with thermal imaging equipment and began scanning the surrounding blocks, and the infrared cameras picked up someone crouched in a residential backyard, hidden beneath trees and unable to scale the fence to escape. Officers moved in and took Victor into custody without further incident. He did have some minor injuries from his struggle with the coach, but he refused to say anything to investigators. The Orange County District Attorney's Office came at him with quite a bit. They stacked this incident together with a lot of his past convictions, and if it all stuck, Victor was looking at 15 years in state prison. His bail started at $100,000 and was later raised to $250,000. He pleaded not guilty to all charges in October of 2012, but 8 months later, he changed course. On June 27, 2013, Espinoza pleaded guilty to false imprisonment in exchange for the dismissal of the other charges, which were street terrorism and gang enhancements. False imprisonment is defined as the unlawful violation of the personal liberty of another, so it doesn't mean he was falsely imprisoned or anything like that. It just means he unlawfully restrained the boy, which was easier to prove than full-blown kidnapping. And he eventually received a 32-month prison sentence, far less than the 15 years he originally faced, but it was enough to remove him from the streets for a while. I wasn't able to find any other updates on this guy, nor was I able to find any other pictures. It's a very obscure case, and I don't even remember how I came across it, but I hope this man isn't doing well, and I hope his victims are. It's a short one with a lot of reporting gaps, but it was just so bizarre, I had to cover it. So guys, it looks like we might actually be able to hit 100K by New Year's. I'm at 90K right now. We only need 10,000 more and there's like 20 days left. Please consider subscribing. If not, it's all good. Either way, I'm done asking after this forever. In January of 2009, a 14-year-old boy on China's eastern coast was browsing the internet and messaging his friends, something we've all done a million times. But what was about to happen to him, I don't even have words for. Like, you would never ever expect this to happen. It is extremely rare, but it has happened before, and it involves a piece of furniture. To understand what happened in this situation, I need to first explain to you a little bit about how adjustable office chairs actually work. The mechanism that lets you raise and lower your seat is called a pneumatic lift. It's pretty simple. It just uses a gas cylinder filled with pressurized nitrogen gas, and when you pull the lever, you're releasing a valve that allows the gas to compress or expand, which moves the seat up or down. In a properly manufactured chair, this system is incredibly safe. The nitrogen's inert, which means it doesn't react with anything, or it's not combustible, and the cylinder walls are thick enough to contain pressure through hundreds of thousands of cycles. Like, you've probably never had an issue with yours. But during the mid-2000s in China, the office furniture market was flooded with what locals called 3-no products. In this case, chairs that were sold without any manufacturer name and no factory address or contact information. These chairs looked identical to legitimate ones, but they cost a fraction of the price. And the reason they were so cheap is that, of course, corners were being cut in ways that consumers could not see. So like, for example, some of these illegal manufacturers were using compressed air instead of nitrogen to save money, and compressed air contains oxygen, which can react with the lubricating oils inside the cylinder under heat and friction. Other products had cylinder walls so thin they couldn't reliably contain the pressure, and the chair this teenager was sitting on that January afternoon was almost certainly one of these products, though no official investigation ever identified the specific manufacturer. So on January 14th, 2009, the boy was home alone during his school break. His parents were at work and he was doing what teenagers do, sitting at his desk scrolling through websites with music playing in the background. At some point, he goes down to adjust his chair height, but this time, the gas cylinder failed catastrophically. The pressurized contents of that metal tube released all at once, and the force was enough to send the steel piston rod straight upward through the seat and into his body. And yes, it entered him that way. Despite this, the boy was still conscious. Even though he was in unimaginable pain and fear, he managed to reach his phone and call his father to tell him what had happened. By the time emergency responders arrived, he was still able to communicate, but the internal damage was just too severe. He would eventually pass away after being rushed to a hospital, and they tried working on him for over an hour. His COD was primarily ruptured vessels in his lower body. However, a later report from a Chinese news outlet added that doctors performed a CT scan and discovered something else. A small metal fragment, believed to be a screw washer from the chair's base, had penetrated his chest cavity and damaged his lung as well. There's not really that many details on this, but I just can only imagine how bad this must have actually been if that ended up happening. And despite all the wild headlines that this case generated, I really feel for this boy. no official government investigation report has ever been made public, or at least not that I could find. It seems that no manufacturer was ever identified and therefore was never held accountable, so many others out there likely had this exact same chair. The boy's father, in one of the only family statements that made it into Chinese media, said that he could not imagine that his child, just sitting on a chair, could have such an accident. And doctors at that same hospital later revealed that they had treated 3 other patients with similar pneumatic chair injuries, all of them happening within just 1 month of each other. The other victims survived because the injuries weren't as severe, but that means that this was absolutely a pattern. About 5 weeks after the event, it really started to spread beyond just China. English tech blogs picked it up and it spread all around early social media. Even since then, it's popped up now and again, and you may have seen this before, but now that I have this channel, I just had to look into it a little more. But nonetheless, no one went to prison, no company paid damages, no regulations changed in any documented way, and because of this incredibly unsafe practice, a young one lost his life. Rest in peace to him. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I really tried to go the extra mile with this one, so I hope you notice. I spent a lot of time. And also, I still will be uploading throughout the holidays. I've got entries planned ahead and all that, so that way I can still take time off. I'll see you again very soon.